The bullet had grazed her arm just enough to send Rebecca Norton tumbling from her horse into the ravine. And now she was alone in the Texas wilderness with a storm rolling in fast and 3 outlaws somewhere behind her. She pressed her hand against the bleeding wound and stumbled through the mesquite brush, her boots sliding on loose rock as thunder rumbled overhead. The sky had turned an ugly purple gray, and the wind whipped her dark hair across her face. She had left Presidio 3 days ago with a wagon train heading east, carrying the deed to her late father's ranch, and enough money sewn into her skirts to start fresh in San Antonio. But the wagon master had gotten drunk and wandered off the trail, and then the Comstock brothers had come riding out of nowhere with guns drawn. Rebecca had run. It was all she could do. The other travelers were men who had scattered in different directions, and she had no idea if any of them had survived. Her horse was gone, probably halfway to Mexico by now, and the storm was going to hit any minute. She needed shelter. She needed help. She needed a miracle. The first drops of rain hit her face like cold needles as she crested a small hill. Through the gathering darkness, she saw smoke rising from a chimney maybe half a mile away. A cabin. Thank God. She started running, her injured arm throbbing with each step, her lungs burning as the rain began to fall in earnest. By the time she reached the cabin door, she was soaked through, shivering and barely able to stand. She pounded on the rough wood with her good hand, gasping for breath. The door swung open almost immediately, and she found herself staring up at a tall man with sandy brown hair and eyes the color of whiskey in lamplight. "Help," she managed to say before her knees buckled. The man caught her before she hit the porch. Strong arms lifted her easily, and then she was inside, out of the rain, and he was kicking the door shut behind them. He carried her to a chair near the fireplace and set her down gently. "You're bleeding," he said. His voice was deep and calm with a slight drawl that marked him as Texas-born. "Let me see." Rebecca tried to pull away, but she didn't have the strength. The man was already examining her arm with steady hands, his touch surprisingly gentle. He had a weathered face that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors, with fine lines around his eyes and a mouth that looked like it didn't smile often. He wore a simple cotton shirt rolled up to his elbows and dark trousers tucked into worn boots. A gun belt hung on a hook near the door. "It's just a graze," he said after a moment. "Bullet didn't go through. You're lucky." "Doesn't feel lucky," Rebecca said through chattering teeth. The man stood and moved to a cabinet on the far wall. He pulled out a bottle of whiskey and a clean cloth, then returned to her side. "This is going to sting." He wasn't lying. Rebecca hissed as he poured the whiskey over her wound, then bit down on her lip as he wrapped the cloth around her arm with efficient movements. His hands were rough with calluses but surprisingly deft. "What's your name?" he asked as he tied off the bandage. "Rebecca Norton." "Frank Norton," he said, then caught himself. "No relation, Frank Nelson." Despite everything, Rebecca almost smiled. "Small world, big state," Frank corrected. He stepped back and looked at her properly for the first time. "Who shot you?" "The Comstock brothers. They hit our wagon train this afternoon. I ran." Frank's expression darkened. "The Comstocks. They're bad news. How many?" "3 of them. I don't know if they followed me. In this storm, they'd have to be crazy to keep tracking." Frank moved to the window and peered out into the darkness. Rain was hammering against the glass now, and the wind howled around the cabin like a living thing. "You're safe here for tonight at least. They won't be going anywhere in this weather." Rebecca looked around the cabin properly for the first time. It was small but well-maintained, with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and a single bed pushed against the far wall. Everything was neat and orderly, the home of a man who lived alone and liked it that way. "I'm sorry to intrude," she said. "I'll leave as soon as the storm passes." Frank turned from the window and gave her a look that was almost amused. "You're not going anywhere tonight. That's a real Texas gully washer out there. Flash floods will make the creeks impassable by morning. You'll need to wait it out." As if to emphasize his point, lightning flashed, followed immediately by a crack of thunder that shook the cabin. Rebecca flinched. She had never been afraid of storms, but after being shot at and running for her life, her nerves were stretched thin. "You're soaked through," Frank said. "You need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death." Rebecca felt her face heat. "I don't have anything else to wear." Frank moved to a trunk at the foot of the bed and pulled out a folded shirt. "It'll be big on you, but it's clean and dry. I'll turn around." He handed her the shirt and then turned to face the wall, his arms crossed over his chest. Rebecca hesitated for only a moment before standing on shaky legs. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons of her dress, stiff with cold and fear. She managed to get the soaked fabric off, then pulled Frank's shirt over her head. It fell to mid-thigh on her, the sleeves hanging past her hands. It smelled like wood smoke and soap. "I'm decent," she said quietly. Frank turned around. His eyes flickered over her briefly, then moved away, but not before she saw something shift in his expression. He cleared his throat and walked to the fireplace, stirring the embers and adding another log. "You hungry?" he asked. Rebecca realized she was starving. "Yes, please." Frank pulled a pot from the fire and ladled something into a wooden bowl. He handed it to her along with a spoon, and she took it gratefully. It was some kind of stew, thick with meat and vegetables, and it was the best thing she had tasted in days. "This is good," she said between bites. "Rabbit and whatever else I could find," Frank said. He leaned against the mantel, watching her eat. "You said you were with a wagon train. Where were you heading?" "San Antonio. My father died last month and left me the ranch near Presidio, but it's more debt than property. I sold it to pay what he owed and figured I'd start fresh somewhere new. That's rough country to travel alone." "I wasn't alone. There were 5 of us, a wagon master and 4 others." Rebecca set down the empty bowl, her hands still trembling slightly. "When the Comstocks came, everyone scattered. I don't know what happened to them." Frank was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "The Comstocks have been terrorizing this area for months. Law can't seem to catch them. They know the territory too well." "Are you a lawman?" Rebecca asked. "No, just a rancher. Got a small spread about 2 miles north of here. I use this cabin when I'm working the south pastures." He pushed away from the mantel and walked to the bed. "You need to rest. Take the bed." "I'll sleep on the floor." "No," Rebecca protested immediately. "I can't take your bed. This is your cabin." "And you're injured and exhausted," Frank said. His tone left no room for argument. "Take the bed." Before Rebecca could protest further, Frank pulled the blankets off the bed and tossed them to the floor near the fireplace. He grabbed a pillow and added it to the pile, then looked at her expectantly. "I really don't feel right about this," Rebecca said, but she was so tired her words lacked conviction. "You've been shot, chased by outlaws, and caught in a storm," Frank said. "You're taking the bed. That's final." Rebecca knew she should argue more, but the bed looked impossibly inviting, and her whole body ached. She stood slowly and made her way over to it, sinking down onto the mattress with a sigh. Frank pulled one of the blankets from his pile and brought it over, spreading it over her. "Thank you," she said softly, looking up at him, "for everything, for helping me, for the food and the clothes and the bed. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't found this place." Frank's expression softened slightly. "You're welcome. Now get some sleep. We'll figure things out in the morning." He turned down the lamp until the room was lit only by the firelight, then settled onto his makeshift bed on the floor. Rebecca watched him for a moment. This stranger who had taken her in without question, who had tended her wound and fed her and given up his bed. He lay on his back with one arm behind his head, staring at the ceiling, looking perfectly comfortable on the hard wooden floor. "Frank," she said into the darkness. "Yeah, do you live out here all alone?" There was a pause. "Most of the time I like the quiet. Don't you get lonely?" Another pause, longer this time. "Sometimes, but lonely is better than being with the wrong people." Rebecca wondered what that meant, but she was too tired to ask. The rain drummed steadily on the roof, and the fire crackled in the hearth, and despite everything that had happened, she felt safe. She closed her eyes and let herself drift. She woke sometime in the night to the sound of Frank moving around. The fire had burned low, and the cabin was dark except for the red glow of the embers. She watched through half-closed eyes as Frank added wood to the fire, his movements careful and quiet. He glanced toward the bed, and she quickly closed her eyes all the way, pretending to sleep. She heard him settle back down on the floor, and she let herself relax again. When she woke the second time, pale morning light was filtering through the windows, and the rain had stopped. She could hear birds singing outside and the steady drip of water from the eaves. The smell of coffee filled the cabin. Rebecca sat up slowly, wincing as her injured arm protested. Frank was at the table, a steaming cup in front of him, and he looked up when she moved. "Morning," he said. "How's the arm?" "Sore but better," Rebecca said. She pushed the blanket aside and stood, suddenly very aware that she was wearing only his shirt and her undergarments. "Is it safe to go outside?" "Storm passed about an hour ago," Frank said. He stood and poured another cup of coffee, then brought it to her. "But the creeks are still high. You won't be able to cross safely for at least another day." Rebecca took the coffee gratefully. "I don't want to impose any longer than necessary." "You're not imposing," Frank said. His eyes met hers, steady and honest. "You're welcome to stay until it's safe to travel." They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, and Rebecca felt something shift in her chest. In the morning light, she could see Frank more clearly. He was younger than she had first thought, probably in his late 20s, with a strong jaw and a straight nose that had been broken at least once. There was something solid about him, something dependable. "I should check on the horses," Frank said, breaking the moment. "Make yourself at home. There's bread and some preserves if you're hungry." He pulled on a coat and headed outside, leaving Rebecca alone in the cabin. She sipped her coffee and moved to the window, watching as Frank walked to a small barn she hadn't noticed the night before. He moved with easy confidence, a man comfortable in his surroundings. Rebecca found her dress hanging near the fireplace, still damp but wearable. She changed quickly, folding Frank's shirt carefully. Her arm was stiff and sore, but the bleeding had stopped. She found the bread and preserves he had mentioned and made herself a simple breakfast, feeling strange about going through someone else's supplies but too hungry to refuse. Frank returned as she was finishing, stamping mud off his boots on the porch. "Horses are fine. I checked the creek. It's running high and fast. Give it another day at least." "I don't have another day," Rebecca said, anxiety creeping into her voice. "The Comstocks might still be out there, and I need to get to San Antonio before my money runs out." "The Comstocks are long gone," Frank said with certainty. "They're not the type to stick around after a job goes wrong. They'll be halfway to the border by now." He poured himself more coffee and leaned against the counter. "As for San Antonio, one more day won't make much difference. Better to arrive late than not at all." Rebecca knew he was right, but being idle made her nervous. She was used to working, to doing something productive. Her father had taught her that much before the whiskey had taken him. "Is there anything I can do to help?" she asked. "To earn my keep." Frank looked at her with something like surprise. "You don't need to earn anything. You're a guest." I'd feel better if I could be useful." He considered this for a moment, then nodded. "All right. I need to check the fence line on the south pasture. You can come with me if you're up for a walk. The fresh air will do you good." They set out after Frank made sure Rebecca had proper boots and a coat. The morning was crisp and clean after the storm, the sky a brilliant blue, and everything smelled of wet earth and sage. Frank led the way along a narrow trail, moving with the easy stride of a man who knew every inch of his land. "How long have you had the ranch?" Rebecca asked as they walked. "About 5 years. Bought it with money I saved from working cattle drives." Frank held a branch aside so she could pass. "It's not much, just a few 100 acres and a small herd, but it's mine. That must be a good feeling." "Best feeling in the world," Frank said, and she heard the satisfaction in his voice. "Building something that's yours that no one can take away, that's what matters." They reached the fence line, and Frank began checking the posts and wire, making small repairs where needed. Rebecca helped where she could, holding tools or steadying posts. They worked in comfortable silence for the most part, and Rebecca found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. There was something peaceful about this kind of work, something honest. "You know your way around a ranch," Frank observed as she helped him tighten a section of wire. "My father had a place near Presidio," Rebecca said. "I grew up working it, not that it did much good in the end." "What happened?" Rebecca was quiet for a moment, deciding how much to share. "He started drinking after my mother died. That was 10 years ago. The ranch went downhill after that. By the time he passed, there was nothing left but debt and broken promises. I'm sorry. It's just the way things are sometimes." Rebecca handed him a tool. "You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved." Frank looked at her with understanding in his eyes. "No, you can't." They finished the fence work around midday and headed back to the cabin. Frank shot 2 quail on the way, quick, efficient shots that spoke of years of practice. Back at the cabin, he cleaned the birds while Rebecca started a fire and set water to boil. They worked together easily, falling into a rhythm that felt natural and right. "You're a good cook," Frank said as they ate the roasted quail with some potatoes he had fried up. "My mother taught me before she died," Rebecca said. "She always said a woman should be able to feed herself and anyone else who needs feeding. Smart woman. She was." Rebecca smiled at the memory. "She was tough as nails and twice as sharp. My father never quite recovered from losing her." "Sounds like she was one of a kind." "She was." They talked as they ate, sharing stories about their lives, their families, their hopes. Rebecca learned that Frank had grown up on a ranch in East Texas, that he had lost his own parents to illness when he was 19, that he had spent years drifting before deciding to settle down and build something of his own. He was quiet by nature, he admitted, but not unfriendly. He just preferred his own company to most people's. "Most people talk too much and say too little," he explained. "Present company excluded." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "I've been accused of being too direct." "Direct is honest," Frank said. "I like honest." As evening fell, they sat by the fire, the cabin warm and cozy around them. Rebecca mended a tear in her dress while Frank cleaned his rifle, and it all felt strangely domestic, like they were an old married couple settling in for the night. The thought made Rebecca's heart skip in a way that both thrilled and frightened her. She barely knew this man. She had been here less than 24 hours, and yet she felt more comfortable with him than she had with anyone in years. There was a steadiness to Frank, a quiet strength that made her feel safe. She kept stealing glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking, admiring the way the firelight played across his features, the way his hands moved with such practiced ease. "You're staring," Frank said without looking up from his rifle. Rebecca felt her face flame. "I'm sorry, I was just thinking." "About what?" about how strange life is. Yesterday I was running for my life, and tonight I'm sitting by a fire like nothing happened. Frank set down his rifle and looked at her. You're safe here. I won't let anything happen to you. The certainty in his voice made Rebecca's throat tight. Why are you being so kind to me? You don't know me, don't I? Frank's eyes searched her face. I know you're brave. You ran when you needed to and kept going when you were hurt. I know you're proud because you want to work for your keep instead of accepting help. I know you're honest because you don't try to be anything you're not. That's enough for me. Rebecca set down her mending with trembling hands. Frank, you don't have to say anything, he said gently. I just wanted you to know that you're welcome here for as long as you need. But Rebecca found she did want to say something. She wanted to tell him that she felt it too, this strange connection that had sprung up between them. That she hadn't felt this way about anyone in her entire life. That the thought of leaving this cabin and never seeing him again made her chest ache. Instead, she said, "Thank you. That means more than you know." They sat in silence for a while longer, the fire crackling between them, until Frank stood and began preparing his bed on the floor again. Rebecca watched him, guilt gnawing at her. "Frank, please take the bed tonight," she said. "I feel terrible about you sleeping on the floor." "I'm fine," Frank said. "I've slept in worse places. At least here I've got a roof and a fire." "We could share the bed," Rebecca blurted out, then immediately regretted it. "I mean, it's big enough for two, and we could put some blankets between us for propriety, and you'd be more comfortable than the floor." She trailed off, mortified. Frank was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That wouldn't be proper," he said finally. "I know. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have suggested it. But I appreciate the thought." Frank's expression softened. "Tell you what, I'll take the bed and you take the floor. That way you won't feel guilty. Absolutely not. Then we're at an impasse." Frank crossed his arms, but there was amusement in his eyes. "Guess we'll both have to take the floor." Rebecca laughed despite herself. "You're impossible, so I've been told." In the end, Frank took the floor again, and Rebecca took the bed. But she lay awake for a long time, listening to his breathing and thinking about everything that had happened. She had come here by accident, driven by desperation and fear, but now she didn't want to leave. This cabin, this man, it all felt right in a way that nothing had felt right in years. But she couldn't stay. She had no money, no prospects, and no claim on Frank's hospitality beyond basic human decency. Come morning, if the creeks were passable, she would have to leave. She would have to go to San Antonio and find work and build a new life, and Frank would stay here on his ranch, and they would probably never see each other again. The thought made her want to cry. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Rebecca woke to find Frank already up and about, making breakfast. She dressed quickly and joined him, trying to memorize everything about this moment. The way he moved around the cabin, the smell of coffee and bacon, the slant of morning light through the windows. "Creek's still high," Frank said as he handed her a plate, "but it should be passable by afternoon if you're determined to go." Rebecca heard the question in his statement. She sat down at the table, her appetite suddenly gone. "I need to get to San Antonio. I need to find work." "What kind of work? Anything honest. Maybe a boarding house or a restaurant. I can cook and clean and keep books." Frank was quiet for a moment, pushing his food around his plate. "What if you didn't have to go to San Antonio?" Rebecca looked up sharply. "What do you mean, I mean?" Frank set down his fork and met her eyes. "I could use help here on the ranch. The work's hard and the pay isn't much, but you'd have room and board and a place to stay, if you wanted." Rebecca's heart started pounding. "You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a choice," Frank said. "You can go to San Antonio and start over with strangers, or you can stay here and help me build something. It's up to you." Rebecca stared at him, trying to read his expression. Was this just about needing help on the ranch, or was there more to it? Did he feel the same pull that she did, the same sense of rightness? "I don't want to be a burden," she said carefully. "You wouldn't be. I need the help and you need the work. It makes sense." It did make sense, but it was also terrifying. Staying here, working alongside Frank every day, it would either be wonderful or it would be torture. What if these feelings she had weren't returned? What if she was misreading everything? "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course. Take all the time you need." But Rebecca found she didn't need much time at all. The truth was, she had already made her decision the moment he asked. She just needed to gather the courage to say it. After breakfast, Frank suggested they ride out to check on his herd. He had 2 horses in the barn, a sturdy gelding named Buck and a gentle mare named Daisy. He saddled Daisy for Rebecca, and they set out across the ranch. The land was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Rolling hills covered in grass and mesquite, with rocky outcroppings and distant mountains on the horizon. The cattle were scattered across the pastures, red and white shapes against the green and brown landscape. "It's not much compared to some of the big ranches," Frank said as they rode. "But it's growing. Another few years and I should have a decent-sized herd. It's beautiful," Rebecca said honestly. "You should be proud." "I am." Frank pulled Buck to a stop on top of a hill and surveyed his land. "This is what I always wanted, something that's mine. Something I built with my own hands." Rebecca looked at him, at the pride and satisfaction in his face, and she knew her answer. She didn't want to go to San Antonio. She wanted to stay here. She wanted to help build this dream with him. "Frank," she said, "I'll stay. I want to help." He turned to look at her, and the smile that spread across his face was like the sun coming out. Yeah, if the offer's still open, it's open." Frank urged Buck closer until the horses were side by side. "You won't regret this, Rebecca, I promise." "I know," she said, and she meant it. They rode back to the cabin in high spirits, making plans for how to expand the ranch, what work needed to be done, how they would divide the responsibilities. Frank would handle the heavy labor and the livestock, while Rebecca would manage the house and the books and help with whatever else needed doing. It was a partnership, he said, and partnerships only worked when both people pulled their weight. Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Rebecca moved into the cabin permanently, sleeping in the bed while Frank insisted on taking the floor. They worked together during the day, fixing fences, tending cattle, maintaining the property. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk, sharing stories and dreams and comfortable silences. Rebecca found herself watching Frank more and more, noticing little things about him. The way he was always up before dawn, greeting the day with quiet enthusiasm. The way he treated his animals with gentle respect. The way he never raised his voice, even when frustrated. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't paying attention, with something warm and uncertain in his eyes. She was falling in love with him. She knew it with absolute certainty. She was falling in love with this quiet, steady cowboy who had taken her in and given her a home. But she didn't know how he felt, and she was afraid to risk their friendship by saying anything. A week after she had arrived, Rebecca woke in the middle of the night to the sound of Frank moving restlessly on the floor. She heard him get up and add wood to the fire, then pace across the cabin. She opened her eyes and saw him standing at the window, his shoulders tense. "Frank," she said softly. "Are you all right?" He turned, startled. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't. What's wrong?" Frank was quiet for a long moment. "Nothing, just thinking." Rebecca sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "About what?" "About how this is all wrong." Her heart sank. "What do you mean?" Frank turned from the window and walked toward the bed. The firelight cast shadows across his face, making his expression hard to read. You sleeping in the bed while I take the floor. You working yourself to exhaustion trying to prove your worth. Me pretending this is just about needing help on the ranch. Rebecca's breath caught. What is it about? Frank sat down on the edge of the bed, keeping a respectful distance but close enough that she could see his eyes clearly. You know what it's about, don't you? She nodded slowly, not trusting her voice. I've been trying to do the right thing, Frank said quietly. Trying to be a gentleman, trying not to take advantage of the situation. But the truth is, Rebecca, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment you knocked on my door. And it's driving me crazy having you here and pretending that my heart doesn't race every time you smile at me. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. Frank, I know it's too soon, he continued. I know you probably don't feel the same way, but I needed to tell you. I needed you to know that this isn't just about work or charity or anything else. It's about you. It's about wanting you here not as a hired hand but as something more. Rebecca reached out and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. His hand was warm and rough, and it felt perfect in hers. It's not too soon, she said. And I do feel the same way. I've been falling in love with you, Frank. Maybe from the first night when you gave me your blanket and took the floor without hesitation. Maybe from the moment you looked at me and saw me, really saw me, for who I am. Frank's breath released in a rush. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was imagining things. You weren't imagining anything. Rebecca moved closer and Frank met her halfway. They kissed softly at first, tentatively, and then with more certainty as they realized this was real. This was happening. This was what they both wanted. When they finally broke apart, Frank rested his forehead against hers. I don't have much to offer you, just this ranch and my name and whatever I can build with these two hands. That's everything, Rebecca said. That's more than enough. They held each other for a long time, not speaking, just being together. Finally, Frank pulled back slightly and looked at her with serious eyes. Marry me, he said. Not because you need a home or because I need help. Marry me because we fit, because we're better together than we are apart. Because I love you, Rebecca Norton, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you. Rebecca felt tears spill down her cheeks. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. Frank kissed her again, deeper this time, and Rebecca felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. This was right. This was what she had been searching for without knowing it. Not just a home or security, but love. Real, honest, true love. I'll sleep on the floor until we're married proper, Frank said when they finally broke apart. I won't have anyone saying I didn't treat you with respect. Rebecca laughed through her tears. We're the only people for miles. Who's going to know? I'll know, and you'll know, and that matters. So Frank continued sleeping on the floor, but now there was no awkwardness between them, no uncertainty. They were engaged, promised to each other, and the whole world felt different because of it. The next day, they rode into Presidio to see the judge. The town was small and dusty, just a handful of buildings clustered around a central square. The judge was a kindly old man named Henderson who had known Rebecca's father. I was sorry to hear about John, Judge Henderson said. He was a good man before the drink got him. Thank you, Rebecca said. He had his troubles, but he tried his best. The judge looked between Rebecca and Frank, taking in their joined hands and happy faces. So you two want to get married? Yes, sir, Frank said. As soon as possible. Well, I don't see any reason to wait. How about tomorrow morning? That'll give me time to draw up the papers and find some witnesses. They agreed readily, and Judge Henderson promised to have everything ready. As they left his office, Rebecca felt like she was floating. Tomorrow she would be married. Tomorrow she would be Rebecca Nelson, wife of Frank Nelson, partner in building a life they both wanted. They spent the rest of the day in Presidio, buying supplies and spreading the word about their wedding. Several townspeople who had known Rebecca's father promised to attend, wanting to see John Norton's daughter happy and settled. Frank bought Rebecca a simple gold band from the general store, and she bought him one in return. That night, back at the cabin, they sat by the fire and talked about their future. They wanted children, they agreed, at least 2 or 3 if they were blessed. They wanted to expand the ranch, maybe buy the adjacent property when it came up for sale. They wanted to build a bigger house eventually, something with multiple rooms and a proper kitchen. "But I'll always love this cabin," Rebecca said, looking around at the small space that had become so dear to her. "This is where we started." "This is where you knocked on my door looking like a drowned kitten," Frank teased. Rebecca swatted his arm. "I did not look like a drowned kitten." "You absolutely did, but the prettiest drowned kitten I ever saw." They laughed together, and Rebecca marveled at how natural this felt, how right. A week ago she had been alone and afraid, running for her life. Now she was engaged to a good man, with a home and a future and hope. The wedding took place the next morning in the judge's parlor. Rebecca wore her best dress, the one she had been saving for San Antonio, and Frank wore a clean suit that he admitted he only owned for funerals and formal occasions. Judge Henderson presided, with his wife and 2 neighbors serving as witnesses. The ceremony was simple and brief. Frank and Rebecca exchanged their vows and rings, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Frank kissed Rebecca with such tenderness that she felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Mrs. Nelson," Frank said softly, and Rebecca loved the sound of it. They celebrated with a small meal at the town's only restaurant, then headed back to the ranch. Their ranch now. Their home. That night, Frank finally joined Rebecca in the bed they would share for the rest of their lives. They came together with joy and tenderness, learning each other slowly, and Rebecca thought she had never been so happy. This was what love was supposed to be. Not grand gestures or flowery words, but this. 2 people choosing each other, building something together, facing the world as partners. The weeks and months that followed were filled with hard work and simple happiness. Frank taught Rebecca everything he knew about ranching, and she proved to be a quick study. Together they increased the herd, improved the pastures, and made the cabin more of a home. They added curtains and rugs, a better stove, shelves for books, small touches that made the space truly theirs. The Comstock brothers were caught trying to rob a bank in Fort Stockton. 2 were killed in the shootout, and the 3rd was hanged. When Frank told Rebecca the news, she felt only relief. That chapter of her life was closed. She was safe. She was home. As winter approached, Rebecca began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited until she was sure before telling Frank, choosing a quiet evening by the fire to share the news. "Frank," she said, taking his hand, "I have something to tell you." He looked at her with immediate concern. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right." She placed his hand on her belly. "We're going to have a baby." Frank's face went through a series of expressions, shock, joy, wonder, before settling on pure happiness. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "A baby," he breathed. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Rebecca asked, though she could feel the answer in the way he held her. Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. Frank pulled back to look at her face. "You've given me everything, Rebecca. A home, a partner, and now a child. I'm the luckiest man alive." "We're both lucky," Rebecca said, kissing him softly. "We found each other." The pregnancy was difficult at times, but Frank was patient and attentive, taking over the heavier chores and making sure Rebecca rested. As her belly grew, So did their excitement. They turned the cabin's small storage area into a nursery, building a cradle and sewing baby clothes. They argued good-naturedly about names, finally agreeing that if it was a boy they would name him John after Rebecca's father, and if it was a girl they would name her Sarah after Frank's mother. In late March of 1877, Rebecca went into labor. Frank rode to Presidio for the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen who had delivered half the babies in the county. The labor was long and hard, and Frank paced outside the cabin like a caged animal, starting at every sound. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, he heard a baby's cry. Mrs. Chen opened the door with a tired smile. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy boy. Your wife wants to see you." Frank rushed inside to find Rebecca propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up as he entered, and the love in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. "Meet John Frank Nelson," she said softly. Frank took the baby carefully, marveling at the tiny perfect features, the small fists, the shock of dark hair. His son, his and Rebecca's. "He's perfect," Frank whispered. "You're both perfect." They sat together as the sun rose, a family now, complete and happy. Little John made soft baby noises, and Rebecca leaned against Frank's shoulder, and everything was exactly as it should be. The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful. John was a good baby for the most part, healthy and alert, and he brought a new dimension of joy to their lives. Frank proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle with his son. He would walk the cabin floor for hours when John was fussy, singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice. Rebecca adjusted to motherhood with determination and love. She managed the house and the baby and still helped with the ranch work when she could. It was hard, but it was the kind of hard that felt worthwhile. When John was 6 months old, Frank surprised Rebecca by starting construction on a new house. It was going to take time, he admitted, working on it between ranch duties, but he wanted his family to have more space. Rebecca protested that the cabin was fine, but secretly she was thrilled. The cabin would always be special to them, but a growing family needed room. 2 years after John was born, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant again. This time they were more prepared, though no less excited. Frank had finished the new house, a sturdy 2-story structure with 4 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a parlor. They had moved in just a month before Rebecca's announcement. "Looks like we'll fill these rooms faster than I thought," Frank said with a grin. Their daughter was born in December of 1879, and they named her Sarah Ann Nelson. She had Rebecca's dark hair and Frank's whiskey-colored eyes, and from the start, she was strong-willed and determined. "Takes after her mother," Frank said proudly. "Takes after both of us," Rebecca corrected. With 2 children, life became even busier. But it was a good busy, filled with laughter and love. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Frank hired a couple of hands to help with the work, good men who respected him and treated Rebecca with courtesy. The Nelson Ranch became known for quality cattle and honest dealing. As the years passed, John and Sarah grew into bright, capable children. John was quiet and thoughtful like his father, happiest when working outside with the animals. Sarah was bold and curious, always asking questions and testing boundaries. Frank and Rebecca raised them with love and discipline, teaching them the value of hard work and honest living. When John was 8 and Sarah 6, Rebecca found herself pregnant again. This time she was older, and the pregnancy was harder than the others. Frank worried constantly, but Rebecca remained optimistic. "We're going to have another baby," she told him, "and everything will be fine." Their second son was born in April of 1885. They named him Matthew James Nelson, and he was perfect. But the birth left Rebecca weak, and the doctor warned them that another pregnancy could be dangerous. 3 is a good number, Frank said, holding Rebecca's hand. We've been blessed enough. Rebecca agreed. Their family was complete. 3 healthy children, a thriving ranch, and a love that had only grown stronger with time. What more could they ask for? The children grew, the ranch prospered, and the years passed in a blur of seasons. John inherited his father's way with horses and cattle. Sarah became an excellent rider and wanted to do everything her brother did, much to his annoyance and Frank's amusement. Matthew was the peacemaker of the family, easygoing and friendly, able to charm his way out of any trouble. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Frank took Rebecca back to the old cabin. They had kept it maintained, using it as storage and occasionally as shelter when working the far pastures, but they hadn't spent the night there in years. Remember the night you arrived? Frank asked as they stood on the porch, looking out at the sunset. I was terrified, Rebecca admitted. Shot soaking wet, running from outlaws. I thought my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning. Our life was just beginning, Rebecca corrected, taking his hand. They went inside and Frank lit the lantern. The cabin looked much as it had that first night, simple and functional. The bed where Rebecca had slept while Frank took the floor. The fireplace where they had sat and talked and fallen in love. Best decision I ever made, Frank said, was opening that door. Best decision I ever made was knocking on it, Rebecca replied. They spent the night in the cabin, alone for the first time in months, and it felt like coming home. They talked about everything, how they met, the early days of their marriage, the birth of each child, the challenges they had overcome. They laughed and remembered and held each other close. I would do it all again, Frank said. Every moment, even the hard parts. So would I, Rebecca agreed. Every single moment. As they grew older, Frank and Rebecca remained deeply in love. They had their disagreements, of course, their hard times when money was tight or illness struck. But they faced everything together, always united, always partners. John married a rancher's daughter from Fort Stockton when he was 23, and he and his wife settled on a piece of land Frank deeded to them from the ranch. Sarah scandalized everyone by going to school in San Antonio and becoming a teacher, but she eventually married a banker and settled back near Presidio. Matthew became a veterinarian, the first in the county, and his services were always in demand. Frank and Rebecca became grandparents, then great-grandparents. The ranch that Frank had started with a few hundred acres and a small herd became one of the most successful in West Texas. But Frank never forgot where he came from, and he never stopped being grateful for the storm that had brought Rebecca to his door. One evening, when they were both well into their 60s, Frank and Rebecca sat on the porch of their house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, and the sound of their laughter carried on the evening breeze. "Do you ever think about that night?" Rebecca asked, reaching for Frank's hand. "Which night?" "You know which night. The night I showed up at your cabin, half dead and desperate." Frank squeezed her hand gently. "I think about it all the time. I think about how easily things could have gone differently. What if you had turned a different direction? What if I hadn't been at the cabin that night? What if the storm had missed us?" "But it didn't," Rebecca said. "The storm came and it brought us together, and everything that followed was meant to be." "I've loved you every day since then," Frank said. "Every single day, and I'll love you every day for the rest of my life." "I know," Rebecca said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I know because I feel the same way." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon. Around them was everything they had built together: the house, the ranch, the family, the life. It had all started with a storm and a cabin and a cowboy who gave a frightened woman his blanket and took the floor. As twilight deepened, Frank helped Rebecca to her feet, and they walked inside together, hands linked, hearts united. Behind them, the old cabin still stood on the south pasture, a monument to where their love began. And all around them, in every fence post and every pasture, in every child and grandchild, their love lived on, proof that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. Years continued to pass, marked by changing seasons and family gatherings. Frank's hair turned silver, and Rebecca's dark locks became streaked with white, but they still held hands like newlyweds and still stole kisses when they thought no one was watching. Their children teased them about being romantic fools, but secretly, everyone hoped to find a love like theirs. On their 40th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. 3 children, 12 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren filled the house with noise and laughter. A fiddler played, and Frank insisted on dancing with Rebecca despite her protests that they were too old. "We're never too old," Frank said, spinning her around the parlor floor. "Not for this." Rebecca laughed and let him lead her through the steps of an old waltz. Their children and grandchildren watched with smiles, and several of the grandchildren joined in, filling the room with movement and joy. Later, when the party had wound down and most of the family had gone home or gone to bed, Frank and Rebecca walked out to the porch. The night was clear and cool with a million stars overhead. 40 years, Rebecca marveled. "It's gone so fast." "Best 40 years of my life," Frank said. "Mine too." Rebecca looked up at the stars, thinking about everything they had shared, everything they had built. "Do you have any regrets?" Frank considered the question seriously. "I regret the times I was impatient or thoughtless. I regret the times work kept me from being with you and the children, but regret marrying you, regret our life together. Never, not for a single second." "Good answer," Rebecca said with a smile. "I mean it, Rebecca. You've been my partner, my best friend, the love of my life. You took a chance on a lonely cowboy with a small ranch and big dreams, and you helped make those dreams come true." "We made them come true together," Rebecca said. "That's what partnerships are about, working together, building together, loving together." They stood in the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, and Rebecca thought about that terrified girl who had stumbled to a cabin door in a storm. She never could have imagined this life, this love, this happiness. But here it was, real and solid and true. Frank and Rebecca lived to see their children's children have children of their own. The Nelson Ranch continued to thrive, passing down through the generations. The old cabin on the south pasture became a family legend, the place where it all began, preserved and maintained as a reminder of how love could start in the most unlikely circumstances. When Frank was 78, he became ill with pneumonia. Rebecca nursed him through it with the same devotion she had shown throughout their marriage. He recovered, but he was weaker after that, slower. Rebecca was patient with him, just as he had always been patient with her. "We're getting old," Frank said one evening as they sat by the fire, blankets wrapped around them. "We've earned it," Rebecca replied. "I'm not afraid of dying," Frank said quietly, "but I am afraid of leaving you." Rebecca took his hand, feeling the familiar rough calluses, the strong fingers that had held hers for over 40 years. "When the time comes, we'll face it like we've faced everything else. Together." "Promise me something," Frank said. "Anything. Promise me you'll keep living, really living. Not just going through the motions. The children will want to take care of you, but don't let them make you feel old and useless. You're still Rebecca Norton who ran from outlaws and started a ranch. Don't forget that." "I promise," Rebecca said, her throat tight. "And you promise me something too," "What's that? Promise me you'll fight. When the time comes, don't give up easy. I'm not ready to let you go yet." Frank smiled and kissed her forehead. "I promise." They kept their promises. Frank fought to stay with Rebecca, and Rebecca fought to keep their life vibrant and real. They continued to work the ranch as much as their aging bodies allowed, continued to spend time with family, continued to love each other with the same depth and devotion they had from the beginning. On a spring morning in 1901, Frank and Rebecca celebrated their 44th wedding anniversary. It was a quiet celebration, just the two of them, a simple meal and quiet conversation. Frank seemed tired that day, but content. "Best decision I ever made," he said again, as he had said so many times over the years. "Opening that door." "Best decision I ever made," Rebecca echoed, knocking on it. That night, Frank passed peacefully in his sleep, with Rebecca's hand in his. He was 81 years old, and he had lived a full, rich life. But Rebecca felt like her heart had been torn from her chest. For the first time in 44 years, she was alone. The family gathered for the funeral, and Frank was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sprawling oak tree. At Rebecca's request, they placed a marker noting that this was where Frank Nelson, beloved husband, father, and grandfather, had built a life and a legacy through hard work, honest dealing, and enduring love. The weeks and months after Frank's death were the hardest of Rebecca's life. She had known loss before, when her parents died, when friends passed, but this was different. Frank had been her partner, her other half, and without him she felt incomplete, but she remembered her promise. She kept living, really living. She continued to run the ranch with the help of her sons and hired hands. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on stories of the old days, of how she and Frank had met and fallen in love. She made sure the old cabin was maintained, turning it into a sort of family museum, filled with photos and mementos of their life together. One day, when Rebecca was 83 years old, her great-granddaughter, a bright girl of 16 named Emma, asked her about the cabin. "Tell me the story again, Grandma Rebecca, about the storm and Grandpa Frank." They were sitting on the porch of the main house, shelling peas, and Rebecca smiled at the request. She had told this story 100 times, but she never tired of it. "It was 1876, she began. "I was 23 years old, and I had been shot by outlaws and was running for my life. A terrible storm came up, and I was desperate for shelter. I saw smoke from a chimney and ran toward it. When I got to the cabin, I pounded on the door, and your great-grandfather Frank opened it. He was 27 then, a cowboy working a small ranch. He took me in without question, tended my wound, fed me, and gave me his bed while he slept on the floor." "Just like that?" Emma asked. "He just helped you?" "Just like that," Rebecca confirmed. "That was the kind of man he was. Kind and generous and strong. We were trapped in that cabin for 2 days by the storm, and in that time, we talked and worked together and fell in love. When the storm ended, he offered me a job on the ranch. A week later, he asked me to marry him, and a week after that, we were wed." "That's so romantic," Emma sighed. "It was," Rebecca agreed, "but it was also real. We worked hard, Emma, building this ranch, raising our children, surviving droughts and hard winters and all the challenges life threw at us. But we did it together, and that made all the difference." "Do you miss him?" Emma asked quietly. "Every single day," Rebecca said, her eyes misting. "But I'm grateful for every moment we had. 44 years of marriage, 3 children, a dozen grandchildren, and more great-grandchildren than I can keep track of. Not to mention this ranch and this family. All of it came from that one stormy night when I knocked on his door and he opened it." Emma was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you think you'll see him again?" Rebecca smiled. "I know I will. When my time comes, I'll see him again, and he'll probably tease me about taking so long to join him." "Don't talk like that," Emma said, suddenly fierce. "You're going to live forever." "Nothing lives forever, sweetheart, but love can last beyond death. What Frank and I had, what we built, it's still here in this ranch, in this family, in the stories we tell. That's a kind of forever." Rebecca lived 2 more years after that conversation. She passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 85, in the same bedroom she had shared with Frank for so many years. The family buried her next to Frank on the hill under the oak tree, and the marker read, "Rebecca Nelson, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother." She knocked on a door during a storm and found love that lasted a lifetime. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of John's son, Frank II, who had inherited his grandfather's quiet strength and his grandmother's determination. The old cabin was preserved as a family landmark, a reminder of where the Nelson family legacy began. Children and grandchildren would visit it, hearing the story of the storm and the cowboy and the woman who came to his door. And sometimes, on stormy nights, when the wind howled and the rain lashed against the windows, the family swore they could see 2 figures standing near the cabin, holding hands and looking out at the land they had built together. "Just ghosts and stories," the practical ones said. But the romantics knew better. Some loves were too strong to be contained by death. Some loves echoed through the generations, inspiring and uplifting, proving that the greatest adventures often begin with a single act of kindness. A door opened in a storm, and a cowboy who gave a frightened woman his blanket and took the floor.